Oh, in Scotland, under the
Scotland,
throne.
yeah.
Yes, okay.
I'm
Oh,
just wondering
Lord.
about
I-
something.
And how long was Titanic? 2 videotapes, right? Okay. He was watching it, and I happened to walk through the living room just as the accident took place, and I'm looking at that, I said, that could happen in a school bus, but what they showed in the movie is totally, abjectly false, because a ship is limited by physics. It cannot turn left and scrape its starboard bow on something and then pull away and leave the rest of the ship undamaged. That is a physical impossibility. Now, this model, which I woefully desecrated when I was building it, you'll notice back here it has something called a rudder. When a ship turns, it doesn't turn like a car. A car turns from up here. You turn the wheels, goes like this. That's where people make their mistake. They were used to wagons and cars and that kind of thing. The fact of the matter is, the Titanic steered by a rudder. As it was moving through the water up to a certain speed, the pivot point around which it would pivot would be just behind the bridge. Okay, so it would pivot like this. As it got faster, it went to just in front of the bridge. This meant that the conning officer was standing on the pivot point, so that as the ship would turn, he was pretty much as if the ship was himself. It was not accidental, the position of the bridge. That was engineered into it. Notice that the bridge roof is empty. That's a key to understanding what happened. So we have Titanic, April 14th. Isn't it interesting? It's tax day, 1415. Steaming along, how fast was it going? Well, to be very honest with you, we don't actually know. There's so much different information. But the man who was doing the navigating, the navigator, 4th Officer Boxhall, said 22 knots. So I use that. Okay? As a historian, you have to use what information you get. You don't always have to believe it. It's one of the biggest problems you have, is you have to understand that after the accident, everybody who survives who's in the deck crew, and everyone in particular who was on duty, has to CYA. Okay, first of all, because the best thing that the politicians can do is put you in jail, fine you the rest of your life, and throw it away. Because then they've done their job. They can point with you and say, the captain, the pilot, you know. And the other reason is you want to protect the company you work for, because it'd be nice to have another ship under you someday if you want to pay your bills. So, you know, keep that in mind when you read history. Not just Titanic, but all history. Roger Long, she mentioned, one time he was reading all these stories about the Civil War where they would say that the moonlight was glinting off the bayonets the night before the great battle. So he decided to find out how many of these statements could be true, and he discovered most of the time it was either raining or the moon was down. It was just a poetic license. Besides, they didn't use the bayonets like you think. You know what they called them in the Civil War? Candlestick holders. You stick them in the ground, put a candle in them, and that's how they lit their tents and their, you know. But anyway, I digress, as usual. You may find that you will be tired of listening before I'm tired of talking. Go ahead. So Titanic is steaming along in 22 knots. There's a myth that the captain went to sleep. Why? Because people like that kind of nonsense. I don't know why, but oh, he went to sleep and that's why they want a simple answer. But what Captain Smith did is he had had dinner back in this area of the ship with some of the rich on board, the Wideners and so forth. He came forward, probably outside. You learn as a captain not to engage passengers any more than you have to, or you never get anywhere. Probably came forward outside, up to the bridge. He met first with Second Officer Lightoller, which is exactly what he should have done. They had a conversation which Lightoll's recollection of it is just absolutely perfect. I mean, these two guys, no BS, no chat, no how's it going, do you like dinner? Just the facts about the voyage. And he says, I'll be inside. And everybody says, oh, we went inside to sleep. The captain's quarters on Titanic were right here. There's a companionway right there, and that becomes important. Companionway is nautical terms for the surround around a ladder, which is nautical terms for stairway. So it didn't have a grand staircase, it had a grand ladder, in the sailor way the sailors were taught. But nonetheless, he went inside. We find out from Boxhall, however, he didn't go to sleep. He started navigating his ship. He started plotting all the positions of ice that night. Curious, huh? You didn't hear that in the movie, didn't? No.
Or in any of the books.
No, but that's what he did. Okay. I just realized I left this thing on. Hang on a second. We're going to share. The hell with it. We'll go back to 1912. You want to talk to somebody? Go visit. Captain Smith is doing all this navigating, plotting a position of ice. What's curious is he got back on the bridge just about an hour before they were to find the ice, which they knew. Lightoller exchanges with First Officer Murdoch as officer of the deck. What they did is the three senior officers, not the captain, but the three, his chief officer and first and second officers, they ran 4 hours on, 8 off, 4 on, 8 off, and the crew ran 4 and 4, watch and watch. The crew changed in the middle of each senior officer's watch. That way there's a little bit of continuity. You know, you're not completely changing the watch. For those of you who are Titaniacs as they're known, you probably have noticed that if you look at the design of the officers' quarters, that there's one officer, the captain is on the starboard side, and there's one other officer on the starboard side. And that's Joseph Boxhall, second officer. The fourth officer. And the reason for that is he was the officer in charge of the starboard watch. So he slept on the starboard side. It was all the way back to the sailing days. And the reason for the captain being on the starboard side is because of the rules of the road. The rules of the road, dead ahead, 2 points aft your starboard beam, that's your danger area, that's where you have to give way. So the captain slept on the starboard side where if he was roused out quickly, he would be in the right position to see danger. A lot of these things don't really matter, but they're interesting to know. So Captain Smith is plotting all this. First Officer Murdoch changes. By the way, the evidence strongly suggests that Lightoller was actually on the bridge when the accident took place, but can't prove it. But it's a very lot of evidence of that, so I don't go there. Because as a historian, I can see sort of like a track in the darkness, but I can't tell you that it's true. I find that this is where I love the story, because there's so many of those little dark trails that end nowhere. But you know that it's just because one person didn't survive that we don't know where that trail really went. Captain Smith sees her coming up on the ice, gets a report from the lookouts that they are seeing a hazy horizon. The lookouts even called it haze in their official testimony. By the way, you can look up every word of the testimony online right now. Rob Ottmer, is a friend of mine, is paying out of his own pocket to keep the Titanic Inquiry Project online, and it has every word of the testimony. But anyway, Captain Smith knows they're coming up on ice. The lookouts see the hazy horizon. All right, how many minutes before the accident did they see it? That iceberg. we, in daily life, everything we see with what we call our eyes is reflected light, and we learn to use it. Reflected light is wonderful because it tells me this book cover is red, tells me the hull is black, it tells me what color, the floor, everything is. But that's not the only way to see. And a lookout has to learn other ways to see. For instance, you're steaming along and you see lights on the horizon. And this has happened to me many times. I used to run one of the boats back and forth to Put in Bay. And you're coming in at night and all of a sudden you see some of the lights on shore disappear. You do not know what that is between you and that light on shore. Doesn't make a whit of difference. If it's hard enough to block the light, it's hard enough to be an expensive accident. It might cost you your license. You don't care beyond that. Is it a sail of a sailboat? Is it a lost freighter? I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? So if you're a lookout, you report that. What did the lookouts say they saw? Now this is an exact quote from Fleet, the lookout, one of the fleet, there were two in the crow's nest up here. He said, we saw a black mass against the fog. Mass, not as in Catholic, but as in object. Now, I have had that experience. Coming into Cleveland, anybody from Cleveland? Anybody remember Euclid Beach? Okay. Coming in to Wildwood, right next door was a boat launch and yacht club. I was coming in there one 4th of July, and they started shooting off fireworks at Euclid Beach, and so we were coming in and watching, the fireworks were going on. And I saw the light of the fireworks reflected off the water, and then there was a dark spot. And then, so I did a crash back because we were damn close. I mean, it was, and my dad grabbed the spotlight and put it out there, and not from here to that wall, I almost ran over a boatload of people. Not a light on the boat. I never saw the boat till we put the light on. What I saw was the lack of light, the reflection. That's what Fleet and Lee described. So, they rang their bell. Now, the lookouts have a code. You have to understand, Titanic did have a phone that went between the bridge and the crow's nest. But that was for the officers to call the lookouts, not the lookouts to call the officers. After all, we have protocol. So the lookouts rang a bell, and they still do. You have to learn the code. Ding, something to starboard. Ding, ding, something to port. Ding, 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 dead ahead. So they see a dark spot ahead. Ding, ding, ding. How long before the accident? If you saw the movie, if you read A Night to Remember, seconds, 35 to 50 seconds. You ever heard of Joseph Scarrett? Why? Historians don't like to quote people who go against their preconceived notions. Joseph Scarrett was up here, there, right, you see this actually out of scale little thing here. This is a skylight over the crew mess. That's actually over the galley for the crew mess. This would have been open slightly to let the heat out, even though it was a cold night, and he was right below it. In his testimony, he said, I heard the lookouts ring their bell 5 to 8 minutes ahead of impact. Okay, let's do a little navigation. Why do navigators work in 6-minute increments? Anybody have an idea? We don't work in 5-minute increments. You do because the clock has shows every 5 minutes. Navigators don't. Why?
How the boat can turn
No.
on it.
Goes by tenths?
No. Tenths of an hour. Yes, exactly. I thought you meant 10 minutes. 6 minutes is a tenth of an hour. Now here's a cute little formula. How far would Titanic have traveled at 22 knots in 6 minutes? 2.2 miles. 1/10 of 22. I'm math dyslexic and I can do that. It always amazes me. So what we have is we can now establish how far out this way this black mass was. 2.2 miles. Why 6 minutes? Because 5 and 8 take the median, 6 minutes, easy math for me to do. If the iceberg was that far out, was it to the right or the left of the ship's track? This is a critical factor. The movie and all of the myths would have you believe the iceberg was dead right ahead of the ship right at the beginning. That can't be, because Boxhall and the quartermaster Hitchens, Robert Hitchens, who is an interesting story in his own right. He wound up shooting a guy because the guy sold him a boat and he went bankrupt buying the boat. So he shot the guy that sold it to him. But anyway, that was later in life. Robert Hitchens is up here in the wheelhouse. Both men say that they completed a 2-point turn just prior to impact. Okay, how far is a 2-point turn? One compass point is, there are 32 points in 360 degrees, so it's 11 1/4. I memorized that, I didn't do it in math. 2 points, 22.5 degrees. By the way, if you're ever going to get a captain's license, you better know that one. Because danger zone, 2 points abaft the starboard beam. That's also the arc of visibility of your side lights. You got to know that. But anyway, they said they turned 2 points. I believe them. Why shouldn't I? If the ship turns, when a ship turns, I should say, two things happen. You have advance. That's the amount of travel you go in your original direction until you've completed your turn. And then you have transfer, and that's the sideways movement in the new direction. Now, you got to know this, because if you're bringing a 1,000-footer into a pier someplace, like you're trying to, you might have to, it might be a fifth of a mile up there when you tell the wheelsman, that's what they call them on Great Lakes boats, to put the wheel down, because you got to figure, where will I be when the ship has turned 90 degrees? Well, how much advance? And if you misguess, you'll either be past it or you'll be steaming into shore where there is no opening. So very, it gets, that's where you earn your money. Titanic, in a 22.5 degree turn, would make about 850 feet of transfer. So when it was turning, that means that it would go this way, if it's turning left, 850 feet, while doing this. Now we know, at the instant that that turn started, we can begin to get an idea of how far to the left or right the iceberg was. It wound up fine on the starboard bow. That's over here. That means that the iceberg had to be, roughly speaking, 850 feet to the left of Titanic's track. Nothing had been done. If it had been just left steaming straight ahead, that means the iceberg would have passed down the port side, 850 less the half breadth of 45 feet, roughly speaking, so it would have passed about 800 feet off the port.
If they'd done nothing.
If they had done nothing. Why would they have turned? First of all, compass points were used by everyone in the sailing ship days. Captain Smith, all of his officers came up through sail. All of the men serving as quartermaster and so forth would have had considerable amount of experience in sail. If they hadn't had any, it would be unusual. So what did they do? They knew points, and they talked points. Nowadays, you hear people talk, oh, it's 2 points off the port bow. Well, they don't know what a point is. I mean, that's just, they want to sound nautical, arr, like a pirate, But those days they did. And you would find captains would give orders in 2 points, 4 points, whatever. So it makes sense to turn. Now, you got to understand, Murdoch is out here on the starboard side of the bridge. Why the starboard side? Because it's the danger side, right? He's the only man, only officer on duty looking out forward. Where's Boxhall? This gets interesting. Boxhall's coming out of the officers' quarters when he hears ding, ding, ding. But there's another quartermaster, the relief quartermaster. You steered 2 hours and were relieved. And when the one quartermaster would be the runner, a relief quartermaster, and the other one would steer, and then they'd switch. Because steering for 2 hours staring at a compass will tend to give you, you might want to shoot somebody, come to think of it. Maybe that's what happened. But anyway, I steer, by the way, to the right. And they try to pair quartermasters, one who would steer to the left and one who would steer to the right. Therefore, after 4 hours, it'd be about where they want to be. Yeah, that's a true story. You know where I steer right. Some guys steer left. Error, you know, you have your own personal error. Right here is the reason for the accident. Nobody ever talks about it. It's the compass platform. Come up after I'll show you all this. The compass platform is where Boxhall was headed, because you may think it was 11:40 at night, but if you were on Boxhall's time, it was midnight. And he was making a compass check. And that was a perfect, they had to do it every half hour. So that in one watch, 24 hours, you made 48 compass checks. We're going to find out it was not exactly, there's a time change in here too. It gets really confusing. If you don't like this, you really won't like the next part. But, so they were going to make this compass check. They steered, that is, they did, anybody here do Power Squadron? Know the CVMDT, TVMDC, and all that? I get blank stares. That's how you, when you're navigating. You navigate to a specific compass. They would navigate to this compass, but the quartermaster up here couldn't see it. So they had a steering compass up here. They checked it, this was called the standard compass. They would check the two and always make sure that the steering compass matched, actually didn't match, but they knew what the error was and they'd maintain it. So they were doing it once every half hour. Boxhall goes up on this platform. He's been told by Captain Smith to make that turn. Otherwise, they'd never have turned 22.5 degrees. You do not, just on a whim, change course in the middle of the ocean. Not if you like your job, you know. The captain does that. So Boxhall goes here. He does a compass check, and then he does the turn. But what can Boxhall see up here? What's he looking at?
The man.
Backside of this big steel drum
Done.
called funnel number 2. Where's that iceberg? Over here, okay? It's coming down this way. It gets here and he makes the turn. So I did the math. Fortunately, I have a calculator that did the math. It works trigonometry. It's wonderful. And I punched the numbers in. When they completed the turn, the iceberg would have been just dead ahead or nearly so. And when they finished the turn, they would have been about 35 seconds from impact. So basically what happened is Captain Smith's down there, he's figuring this out. He hears the lookout report with the bell. He says, I got to turn. So he knows, he looks at the clock, Boxhall's going up to the compass platform anyway. You don't send a guy out and then 5 minutes later send him out into a 22-knot wind at 30 degrees. I mean, that's, a good captain takes care of his men too. You know, you can do that if necessary, and you don't think twice about it if necessary, but in this case it wasn't necessary, at least it didn't appear to be. So he combines the compass check with a course change. Boxhall can't see anything. The man in charge of the ship, legally in charge of it right at that moment, is the second officer standing on the starboard bridge. Now, what's happening is what's something called bridge team management is falling apart. And we are losing what's called situational awareness. Every man in the team is doing his job to his best. But nobody knows what the hell's going on, because nobody sees the big picture. Smith is in his private navigation room, not the officer's chart room, doing all his work. He can't see anything but the walls around him. Murdoch is out there. He's not issuing any orders because his captain's already issued the order. He's really like like a locomotive engineer. He doesn't lay the track, you know, he doesn't tell where to blow the whistle. He's just along for the ride until something goes wrong, right? And then he gets blamed. So, fourth officer is back here. He's going to conduct a change. So, on a ship, you have two things. You have the con and the deck. The con is the actual officer who's telling the people operating the ship what speed and direction to travel. The deck is the man who actually owns the ship at the moment. Usually, in confined waters, the deck and the con are combined. But in this case, Captain Smith had taken the con. I beg your pardon, had taken the deck by starting to navigate Titanic. So Murdoch no longer had the deck. Don't forget, he's in charge, but he no longer has the deck. And when Boxhall goes up here to make the turn, he has the con. You separated it, and the two men know not a thing about what the captain and Boxhall. And poor Murdoch's up here. He knows there's something out there, and he assumes the captain has made a good decision. It's the only thing he can do. Bingo bango. This iceberg comes straight in front of the ship. There's a technical term for the next, what we call that. Do you know what it is? Comes from aviation.
Oh, shit.
Yes, the last two words that they usually expunge from the audio tapes on, you know, the flight recorders.
Black box.
Oh, shit. I can hear him saying, Murdoch does the right thing. First thing he does, what? He gives an engine order. Because he knows it's going to take longer than it, before the engineers won't be able to do anything in the time between now and the collision. But that does two things. One, it might help ameliorate the damage. And the other thing is, the engine room telegraphs ring in the middle of the ocean. The engineers know something's going to happen and there's no good coming of this. And, you know, I mean, it's alerting them. The second thing he does is he closes the watertight bulkhead. By the way, on Titanic, he's looking out this way. He had to walk back here, push the button here, then go back to whatever he was doing. And there was no panel that showed the bulkhead doors closing. None. He just pushed the button. He was supposed to ring the bell. He apparently did not, which I wouldn't have either. Boom, you know, because when the doors came down, they had mechanical bells that rang on them anyway. So, you know. And then he turns around. Well, he's just starting to turn around when he feels the ship take the ice. And he orders. Now, the ship it's on the starboard side. What direction would you turn if the ship is striking its starboard bow? Would you turn left or right? Left?
Right.
Left or right?
Turn into it.
If you turn left, you're gonna rake the whole.
Exactly. If you turn
Starboard side.
left, you're going to rake the whole starboard side. So what Murdoch does, the iceberg is coming down here. He turns right, buries the bow into it. He knows he's going to damage the bow. That's a foregone conclusion. He wants to swing the side, the parallel body here, and these little propellators back here, which are very, very necessary to move the ship. And maybe even the rudder to steer it. He wants to move them out of harm's way. Very good set of orders. Now, Titanic had 3 screws. The middle one only worked in forward. It was either on or off, like a fan. You didn't use it for maneuvering. Has anybody here ever run a twin screw boat? You can maneuver it on your shifts. What engine order would you give?
To turn right, to turn to
Yeah.
port.
The logical thing to do would be crash back your starboard engine. The reason for that is that would help you swing the bow into the iceberg, help you swing the stern away from the iceberg, and then it would start some prop wash coming forward to wash away anything that might get in the propeller. Now everybody said, oh, he crashed back both engines. No. The problem here is that Boxhall said he crashed back both ends. We're heavily involved in trying to avoid the ice. Doesn't sound like the accident you heard, does it? Now, what did it do? Has everybody heard? How many people think that the iceberg sliced the forward 5 compartments open?
That's what it says.
Has the butter ever sliced the knife? Have you ever had the butter cut through your knife? Now, which is harder? Steel or ice? And so now, what are we talking about slicing open Titanic? We are speaking nonsense. Total, abject nonsense. What happened, I'm going to use this. You got, okay, you're looking at the starboard side. I'll do it so I'm looking like this. You have a vertical side here, you have a horizontal side down here. The nature of things is this page can do this page can do that, but if this page does this, that page can't. So if you try to buckle the bottom or the side, you're not going to put much strain on the parts you're buckling, but where they join in this seam, you're going to play hell with it.
I'll drop the rivets.
You betcha. And I don't care how good or bad they are. By the way, the rivet story is true, but it's meaningless. It's not the reason the ship sank. It's just, yeah, they didn't. 3 million rivets, you think they were all perfect?
That's a fact.
You know, come on. You open a barrel of nails, you ever get one that didn't have a head on it, or, there's, but the thing is that it didn't sideswipe the iceberg. First of all, the iceberg is shaped with a slope on one side, so I'm doing it on the wrong side, but you can see that it would be very difficult with a sloping iceberg and the shape of the bow for that to happen. I mean, we're talking about another one of those, can't happen. Oh, so what did happen? Well, let's go to find out what did the lookouts experience. They're way up here. Way up here. Any rock and roll in the boat, you're 90 feet off the deck or off the water line, you're going to feel it, right? What did they say? They said that as the ship was along the ice, the starboard bow lifted. Titanic did not slice itself against an iceberg. It ran over an underwater portion of one, and that's what did the damage. It tore into that seam that, right up in here. It did compromise the forefoot right here. There's a little triangular space, and in this model, it's so small it would be closed up. But it actually was there, and it was breached. We know that. It's called a peak tank. Meaningless. Had no holes 1, 2, and 3 were opened up. Boiler room 5 at the front end, or boiler room 6, I beg pardon, at the front end. Boiler room 5 was dry, and at the moment, as far as they knew, boiler room 4 was. It's a whole different picture. That's what the people there said. Later on in England, the guy who designed the ship actually designed it, Edward Wyland, the naval architect, said that with in that condition, it wouldn't sink. So the man who was in charge of the hearing said, well, go back and flood boiler room 6 and boiler room 5. And the guy said, well, it'll sink. And they said, good, now we know why it sank. Total BS. Boiler room 5 was dry as a bone. Boiler room 6 had just a little opening in it. That's what the people who were there experienced. It's not what Walter Lord wrote. It's not what Cameron put in his movie. It's probably not what's, by the way, the gentleman back there, I asked him to let me use this. This was one of the first books about Titanic. Not very accurate, but it's good reading. It's not what's in there either. Now, I had to figure out where, there's a guy by the name of Barrett who's down, he's in boiler room number 6, which is centered right under the bridge. He's the chief or leading stoker. the stokers shoveled the coal in, raked the furnace, and then you had other guys who were called trimmers. They were called trimmers for a lot of reasons, one of which is they trimmed the lumps of coal. That is, stoker coal was big, ship's coal was big lumps that were too big for a fire grate. And you had to break them down, and then they had to trim the bunkers so that the ship didn't list one way or the other. Then they had to carry all that coal and give it to the firemen who actually fed it, the stokers who actually put it in. So anyway, Barrett is up here. The day before, they had put out the fire in the bunker. You've heard about the bunker fire. It was denied for years, and finally, we know what actually happened. It was, people denied. You know, denial is actually a river in Egypt, but the fact is that nobody doubted the bunker fire during the hearings. They knew about it. It had nothing to do with the ship sinking. It does help me place Barrett, because he was with one of the engineers in a bunker when the ship took the ice, and that was there was an auxiliary bunker underneath hold number 3, and that's what he saw open up. And he was checking on the oiling of the steel, which had been turned rust red by the fire, and they were oiling it down, probably with linseed oil. Anybody ever put linseed oil on steel? It's wonderful. It takes away the rust and it preserves it very nicely, and that's what undoubtedly they were doing. They had to dive through into boiler room number 6. I've always wondered why Barrett lied about that. And he was definitely, there's no question in my mind that he knew that he was telling a lie. But I can't prove it. I've never met the man, and I don't think I ever will. But it just doesn't make sense, because his own testimony later on, in the same section of testimony, what he says is basically puts him in boiler room number 6. I never could figure that out. I think I have now. I think he's the man that sank the ship. I can't prove this, but I can, I think he opened a valve an hour and 20 minutes after the accident in boiler room 5. But
Would he have been told to open that?
yes. Oh, I think he was following instructions. Remember what I said about the bridge team management? The same thing goes on in the engine room. And remember what I said about the idea of the big picture? Down in boiler room 5, it's dry. They're lifting manholes to get to valving because they can't use the bilge pump in boiler room 6. They waited too long. They have to use the bilge pump in boiler room 5. Boiler rooms 5 and 6 were centered right under the first funnel. And they were actually a pair. There was a low bulkhead between them, but they were really paired. And so they were going to use the bigger pump in boiler room 5, and they were doing something. One of the engineers fell and broke his leg. The other 2 engineers in the compartment went to his aid. What does that tell you about the command structure? It's just evaporated. You know, in wartime, what do you shoot, soldiers or generals? Shoot generals. You win better, win faster. Okay? I hate to say it, but that's what happened in boiler room number 5. Now it's interesting that Barrett, in his testimony, obviously says, I saw the water come into boiler room 5, this rush of water between the boilers, and I stepped out onto we call it Scotland Road, the working alleyway on E-deck. And he said there was no water coming up at that point, so the water didn't come over the bulkhead. I thought, that's interesting. He doesn't say he climbed a ladder. You got to understand, he had to climb 40 feet to get there, maybe more. He didn't say I ran up the ladder. He said I stepped into the... Okay, if you read the reports, you'll find that all of the valves for the water intakes for the bilge system had access on E-deck so that you could operate the valves even if the lower part of the hold or the compartment was flooded. So if he was going to run a valve, where would he have been? On E-deck. Just where he said he was. Now, here's the thing. Up in the bow, the firemen, they were called the Black Gang, and it had nothing to do with race. In fact, you wouldn't have called anybody black in 1912. Anybody. Not even one of the subcontinent Indians who are Caucasian but darker than, you wouldn't have, no, that would have not been, the black gang, guys who shoveled coal for a living. Most of whom, they didn't bother putting water on anything. They just put their clothes on, would tie their wrists and everything and sleep in them, and when they take a shower when they got home to get off the boat, because it was just, why bother, There was a fireman's tunnel that led from the fireman's quarters aft through the holes to the boiler rooms. That tunnel did not flood during the accident, but it did flood a half hour or 20 minutes later. Curiously enough, the man who found it, Hendrickson, another leading stoker, went to find an engineer, and he went back, not through the tunnel, because now there's water coming in there. So he went back on E-deck through the third class and ran into, remember E-deck? What's on E-deck? Valving. He ran into Engineer Hesketh, who had no reason to be in the berthing area of either the crew or third class men. He was an engineer in charge of boilers. Now, in those days there were no foot valves. We have foot valves today, but in those days you had a pipe, continuous pipe, and then you had valves that would open up suctions into the compartments. Now think about hole number 3, which is right underneath here, is flooded, 35 foot deep. That's the water line. If you open up a valve, the water is going to flow into that pipe from that hold, so you're trying to pump it dry, let's say. Even if you've got a pump back here, a 500-ton pump working back here, you're still going to, if you open a valve forward of that, you're still going to flood like the tunnel. Because water will gravitate, it will seek its own level. What I think sank Titanic, seriously, is when that engineer broke his leg, command structure evaporated, Fireman Barrett was sent, Barrett was sent to operate a valve. Nobody countermanded the order. The other orders that were in the cluster of orders that he was involved with weren't done. Command structure, everybody forgot about him climbing 45 feet up to the valve. He gets up there. Okay. And he looks down and has that, oh my God, moment, Water under 35 foot of pressure, head pressure, out of a 10-inch opening. What do you think that would look like? And the fat lady put away her music. Didn't need to sing anymore. Okay. That's a different story, isn't it? That's a story taken not from Walter Lord, not from movies, not from conventional wisdom, not from books like this. I took it from the testimonies. Why the testimonies? This book, by the way, as he knows, was published under many titles. It's not accurate. It's not real. Okay? It is a real artifact of the era, and as such, historically important. But it's not the story of Titanic as a real ship. What you had was, you have to understand, the officers had to have the ship fatally wounded, or they would have to answer, well, why in the heck did you let it happen? Why did you hold off so long from evacuating? Why did you load more people in lifeboats? The company had to have the ship fatally wounded because they didn't want to admit that their own men had screwed up big time. They couldn't talk about changing course twice because I know that if I take a remedial action as a captain, and that remedial action does not end the danger, that I better not repeat it, because if something goes wrong, I'm repeating a failed action, therefore I am raising my liability to that of maybe criminal. I better take another action. Something else. Doesn't matter what that is, but something else. So they didn't want to admit that and then they didn't want to really look stupid. Well, Mr. Boxall, what happened? Well, I changed course 2 points and ran over an iceberg. You did what? I don't think there was a conspiracy in the sense of a It's not the Watergate conspiracy or any of those that we have, you know, no. I think it was more like when a bunch of people get on a bus and they all want to go to Pittsburgh. And so whatever is necessary, they pay their way. If a driver would need help, they'll give him, because they want to get to Pittsburgh. That's not a conspiracy. That's just common sense. I don't think there was any, there was some dark of night, yeah. But it was mostly among the officers on cut.